On September 12, 1941, a private secretary sat nervously in the hallway outside the cabinet room at 10 Downing Street. Inside that room were Winston Churchill and General Charles de Gaulle, and the secretary was genuinely afraid that the two leaders had finally escalated their ferocious arguments to the point of physically strangling each other. But when he eventually opened the door, there was no brawl. Instead, he found the two men sitting side by side, puffing on cigars with perfectly amiable expressions on their faces. Sitting next to each other, their physical contrast was almost comical. Churchill was a short, stout aristocrat who loved his luxuries. De Gaulle was a tall, angular soldier leading a strict ascetic life. These jarring personality differences were surface-level reflections of two completely opposed national realities. Over the next 4 years, they would manage to save their respective nations, even as they drove each other absolutely mad. To understand why they clashed so intensely, we have to look back to June 18, 1940. On that specific day, both men delivered historic speeches, separated by just a few hours. Churchill stood before Parliament and delivered his famous finest hour address. When he spoke, he carried the overwhelming support of a unified national government. Great Britain faced a terrifying threat, but the island was actively pulling together to brace for the prospect of an invasion that had not yet arrived. Hours later, on BBC Radio, de Gaulle delivered his own appeal to the French people. He spoke as a recently exiled junior minister, a general with no actual army to command. France wasn't dealing with a looming prospect. The nation had been violently pulled apart by the fact of an actual invasion, ending in a rapid government capitulation to Germany. This gap between facing a threat and suffering a defeat forged their worldviews. Churchill maintained an optimistic belief that human agency could avert disaster. De Gaulle developed a melancholic view, convinced that all human enterprises inevitably end in failure. This shows the sheer asymmetry of their positions. On one side, Churchill commands the vast resources of a global empire. On the other side, de Gaulle possesses zero tangible leverage, surviving entirely on British patronage. All he holds is the abstract idea of France. Lacking real cards to play, de Gaulle relied on the only strategy left, the bluff. He acted impossibly stubborn and complained relentlessly, demanding the Allies treat him as the living embodiment of the French state. By 1943, this friction reached a boiling point. The American president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, openly loathed de Gaulle, resulting in incredibly tense diplomatic summits. Trying to placate Roosevelt, Churchill snapped. He sent a telegram to his cabinet back in London, officially asking if they should eliminate de Gaulle entirely as a political force. Wisely, the cabinet declined. Despite the bluffing and the endless headaches, Churchill and de Gaulle were trapped in an alliance of mutual dependence to survive the war. That frayed alliance held together until the Allied triumph in 1945. Yet the peace that followed delivered a strange irony for the victors. Despite his immense wartime heroism, Churchill suffered an immediate political downfall. British voters handed the Labour Party a landslide victory, stripping him of the premiership. He would eventually return to 10 Downing Street in 1951. He spent 4 years in a twilight premiership, battling his own failing health alongside the steady diminishment of the British Empire. Because Britain had only faced the prospect of invasion, the victorious nation clung to the glory of 1940. That powerful nostalgia blinded both the country and its legendary leader to the reality of their fading imperial power. France emerged with a vastly different mindset. Because the French suffered the physical reality of defeat, they held zero nostalgia for 1940. The trauma of occupation forced a brutal political realism. Decades later, the Algerian crisis pushed France to the breaking point. The chaos triggered de Gaulle's dramatic return to power as prime minister in 1958. Not content with standard parliamentary limits, he fashioned the Fifth Republic. He established a powerful semi-monarchical presidency and an independent foreign policy that annoyed the United States. The sparks of their wartime jostling illuminated two remarkably brave men, but their final roles in history were dictated by the differing traumas of their nations. Churchill presided over the twilight of an empire, while de Gaulle became the architect of a modern republic.